Dr. Herbst, I'm impressed with your multi-stakeholder partnership that resulted in the lung MAP program. Lung cancer has a 5-year survival rate of less than 20%. The work that NCI designated cancer centers do is tremendous as far as I'm concerned. In the Tampa area, we have the Moffitt Cancer Center, as you know, which is the only NCI designated cancer center in Florida. They have a partnership which has resulted in the Oncology Research Information Exchange Network, or ORIEN. This is the world's largest, in my understanding, it's the world's largest clinically annotated cancer tissue repositories and data for more than 100,000 patients who have consented to the donation for research. In your testimony, this is my question, in your testimony you mentioned the importance of partnerships to accelerate clinical trials, as well as the need to examine the incentives, structure, and process to facilitate data generation, sharing, and collaboration. Could you briefly elaborate on this and how this should be done, please? Can you elaborate?
Right, and I do compliment Tampa on their work. They were one of the leaders initially in doing this personalized medicine network and bringing it together. And we're basically doing the same thing. The lung map is really, it's a truly national effort. And as I mentioned, it came from an NCI panel and from work at the Friends Brookings meeting. And the thing that's very nice about it is we're working closely with the FDA, with the Foundation for the NIH, and others. We want to really bring these drugs and this testing throughout the nation to the community. So the idea basically is to pick and do profiling in one specific way at all the different centers within 10 days, because patients can't wait. They have advanced disease. You're right. This is even worse than what you mentioned, because this is squamous cell lung cancer, mostly a smoker's lung cancer, where there really are no other therapies to offer these patients, the most advanced widespread disease. And then we're randomizing patients to either the standard of care or to one of these new drugs based on the molecular profile. And we have 5 different drugs. So the way this has worked has really been a good concept, something that the academic community, the clinician community around the country, and the drug companies and the private payers see as a very important way to move forward. And we've all worked together, and it's taken a large amount of collaboration, meetings. It really is a partnership. And I sit here now, but there are hundreds of people who have been involved in this process, and I'm very proud of how we've all worked together, and we're doing it for the patients. And the other thing that's very important is the advocacy community has been involved with this from the very beginning, and they've advised us on some of the issues regarding disclosure and forms and consent forms. So we've really worked, this is really focused on the patient and bringing more drugs to patients quicker. And I just want to add, the FDA has just been so supportive of this process. Of course, these trials all have to go through the standard phase 2, phase 3 criteria. In fact, they're very strict criteria, but we've had advice as we move along. How do you integrate the markers into the trial? So I would say this is something that has to be emulated, and other diseases are already working on this. There's a trial in colon cancer that's moving forward, breast cancer, and others as well.
Terrific. Very encouraging. Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Siegel, you raised the issue of providing greater voice for patients in clinical trials. You mentioned that the investigators are only objective outcome measures, the investigators, but not information from patients like how do they feel, how are they progressing. How could investigators and regulators use qualitative data when making decisions?
Well, thank you for that question. I think it's an important one. It's easier, I think, and that's probably why there's a history of using things that can objectively be measured in the lab or life or death. But beyond with the exception of life or death, usually what's most important is how a patient feels. The science, there is a science behind how to do that. If you're not careful about how you do that, you can introduce a lot of bias. You can use tools that misweigh and that don't really represent patient outcomes. So that has been part of the reluctance or maybe the slowness in incorporating patient-reported outcomes. But that said, I think we're at a place where they can and should be incorporated much more broadly in almost all areas of clinical research.
Thank you very much. Another question for you, Dr. Siegel. Can you explain in layman's terms what adaptive clinical trials are, how they are different from traditional clinical trials? How has FDA viewed adaptive trials? I believe they've released guidance just a few years ago. And have adaptive trials been used in Europe? and what lessons can we learn from Europe?
Sure.
I'm not sure if that's been covered because I had to step out, but if you could elaborate, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, not in any depth. So more traditional trials, you design the trial and how you're going to conduct it and how you're going to analyze it up front. And then at the end, you unblind the data and you do your analyses. That offers the advantage of avoiding a lot of biases that can lead to inaccurate assessments of treatment effects. In adaptive trial designs, you learn as you move on. You use biomarkers or actual outcomes in patients if they're available fast enough to understand what are the more promising therapies, perhaps, maybe putting more patients onto those therapies, changing randomization, substituting, changing, or selecting among doses, or even changing entry criteria. You could change almost any part of a trial. A lot of scientific work has gone into how to utilize adaptive trials because if done wrong, there are opportunities to introduce bias, but they allow real-time learning from what's happening within a trial, and therefore they can be extremely powerful tools in drug development. The FDA has been out in a leadership position in terms of providing guidance as to how they could be used in the regulatory setting. There is, of course, some conservatism because of the scientific challenges, but it's a opportunity to accelerate our ability, as you've heard about from Dr. Herbst, to accelerate our ability to learn within clinical trials, and I think it's one that is very much underutilized.
Very good. Thank you. I yield back to Mr. Chair.